Welcome, everybody. My name is Maurice Ballon. I am the managing partner of Baker McKenzie, and I want to thank the SAC Historical Society and the South Asian Bar Association for choosing our location to have this chat. It is truly a historic meeting, and historic because this is Asian American and Pacific Islander Month, and we have quite a few activities going on here at Baker to honor the heritage of many Asian Americans, and honestly, by coincidence, really, truly, the planning of this event was sort of in the works. That we now have Director Gurbir Grewal here, and in this month, I just feel that's truly an honor to have you, and it's historic to have you there. And I want to thank Peter Chan and my partner Nandu. I never want to mess up Nandu's last name. I always do, Macharaju, and for pulling this event together. But I want to thank you all for being here, and I'll turn it over to Nandu to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Maurice, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. On behalf of SABA-DC and the SEC's Historical Society, it's just a real pleasure to host this event. And thank you so much, Director Grewal, for agreeing to be here and to participate in this event with us. The genesis of this event started months ago. Peter and I were at a partners meeting probably about 7 or 8 months ago. We were sitting, I think, in a room down there, and I think I'd posted something on LinkedIn about something I was doing with SABA-DC. Peter saw that, and that kind of inspired a conversation where he was telling me about all the work that he did with the SEC Historical Society, and he was talking about his past work with the SEC as an assistant branch chief in the Chicago office. And through those conversations, it naturally came to this idea of we had to do this. We had to host this event with Director Grewal because of his historic appointment and what it means to the SEC Historic Society, but also what it means to SABA-DC as an organization to have a leader at the very, very top of the SEC. We opened our conversation between the two organizations. We started planning, and over the course of months, we started to pull it all together. And as it kind of, came to fruition, we thought this has to be in May, and it has to be in May because this is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we just thought this was such an important thing to do during this month. Because it really does it's historic, and it really does celebrate a trailblazer in the field of the SEC. But overall, when you look at Director Grewal's, the course of his career, as many of us have followed, first of all, he's the first South Asian to be appointed head of the SEC Enforcement Division. He was the first state attorney general for the state of New Jersey. He was the first Sikh American to be appointed to be the head of a county district court, a prosecutor in Bergen County, which is the most populous county in the United States. His entire career is a career of firsts, and it's a trailblazing career. And it really meant that we just had to do this month because we wanted to commemorate his historic career and his experience. And take a moment to reflect in the course of this month at what it means to be a trailblazer as an Asian American. It kind of sends the signal that we all belong in the space. We all belong at the very top. You can aspire to these leading roles. So thank you so much for your career, for your inspiration, and thank you for being here. This really means a lot to us. I'd now like to pass the mic to Jim Barrett, who's going to speak on behalf of the SEC Historical Society. So thanks so much, and welcome up, Jim Barrett.
Thanks, All right. Well, thank you, Nandu, and thank you, Baker McKenzie, for this amazing spot, and for SABA-DC for helping to co-host this event and this special interview with Director Grewal. My name is Jim Barrett, and in my day job, I'm a director at Alex Partners, a multinational consulting firm. But I'm also the current chairman of the SEC Historical Society. And so on behalf of the Society, I'd like to welcome all of you that are in the room here. Those are here remotely, and this is being recorded, so you can come back and see it another time as well. For those who aren't familiar with the SEC Historical Society, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're not legally tied to the SEC, but we were formed by some former SEC leaders some 25 years ago that had the idea and the forethought to share and preserve the history of the SEC. And so along that same time frame, the Society has been developing a virtual online collection. It's our virtual museum. And you'll see in there photos, papers, we have galleries, exhibits, all kinds of things. And we have unique and hard to find documents and information. And we have oral histories too, and much like the interviews of people that used to work at the SEC and that currently still do, it allows them to describe what they went through when they were at the SEC, some of the challenges, and I think it's a great way to kind of capture history. So all these resources are available free online. You go to www.sechistorical.org and you'll see it. And I think today's event is kind of exemplary of almost what an oral history would be. And the oral histories are one of the most valuable assets we have in our collection. The people have told us the value of the Virtue Museum, and we had, in fact, not long ago, we received a letter from Diana Henriquez, an award-winning journalist and author, and I wanted to read what she said. She said, "Not long after I began work on the book, the pandemic shut down most of the archives I expected to rely on for my research. It is literally true that I could not possibly have written this book without the SEC Historical Society's online archives. Please accept this gift as a small token of my gratitude for the gift that the Society has given all of us, a priceless, accessible record of one of the most important stories in American finance." So if you haven't explored the Virtual Museum, I encourage you to do it. It's really a great resource. So enough about the Society. I'd now like to introduce Peter Chan, who will be moderating today's interview. Peter is currently a partner at Baker McKenzie. He spent 2 decades at the SEC, including assistant regional director in the Chicago regional office. Is that right?
That's right.
Exceptional personal commitment and effectiveness as a member of the Division of Enforcement. And before joining our board of trustees, he also served several years at our board of advisors. And so, Peter, I just really want to thank you for your service and dedication to the Society. Finally, I want to thank Director Grewal for taking the time from your busy schedule to share your personal and professional history here today. We're very much looking forward to it. So with that, Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jim. And actually, I want to pick up something, Gurbir, that Jim mentioned, which is that we're actually speaking with 3 audiences today. We have this wonderful audience here. We also have a telecast with folks all over, actually, the nation and potentially the world through the simulcast. But we're also speaking to the future because what we are saying will become part of the virtual archive, and hopefully for scholars, researchers, and maybe young law students, years from now, they will be hearing this. So on behalf of all 3 audience, thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you for helping organize this. I'm someone who trolls the SEC Historical Society website and LinkedIn page, and it's a source for me. So thank you for all that you do, especially for somebody like me who didn't grow up in the SEC. It's a remarkable resource, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate SABA-DC and Baker for opening up this beautiful space for this conversation.
Sounds great. I want to get started. I have this list of questions, but I want to get started. Have you tell us a little bit about your journey to become the director of the SEC's Division of Enforcement, but I want to go way, way back. So let's start with your background as a young boy growing up in New Jersey, and talk about what motivated you to, end up getting a degree at Georgetown School of Foreign Service and then law school. So tell us about your origin story.
Sure. As a child of immigrants from India, I grew up wanting to be the director of enforcement at the SEC.
Great answer.
It was a lifelong ambition. No, in all seriousness, I've had a really non-linear career path. It's not anything I expected, this opportunity and the opportunities before this one. Like many of you in this room, and maybe like you as well, Peter, I'm the child of immigrants. My parents flew over oceans and continents to come to this country to start a new life. They came here for economic opportunity and for educational opportunities. And they came here to make sure that their children had more opportunities than them. And so what that meant for many of us who grew up in Asian households was that they wanted us to become doctors.
Yes.
And I disappointed my parents because I wasn't good in science, I wasn't good at math, and I chose to pursue a career to be a writer. That's what I wanted to do out of high school. I went to the smallest liberal arts college I could find in the most isolated place I could find to try to write the next great American novel. So I went to Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. That doesn't usually show up on my resume or on my Wikipedia page or whatever. But I went to Bates. I wanted to go to the New England woods and write the next great American novel. Mm-hmm. That was what I wanted to do, and that's how I wanted to disappoint my parents. A couple of problems with that choice. One was I wasn't really good at writing fiction. The second was that I'd never been to Maine in the winter. And after one Maine winter, I thought about transferring. And I had a roommate who had a bunch of transfer applications, and the one he wasn't using was the Georgetown application. And so I started to look at it. I never requested any transfer applications. And I started to read about the School of Foreign Service. And I said, this seems pretty great. You could represent the United States and travel to far-flung places, and it would be really a cool experience. And so I applied, and I got in. And I loved it. That's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to pursue a career in foreign service. And then in '95, when I graduated, President Clinton had a hiring freeze at the State Department, and they weren't offering the exam to join the Foreign Service. And so I had to find a plan B. Mm-hmm. And plan B for me involved going back to New Jersey, spending a lot of time on my parents' couch, and it also involved a lot of Law and Order marathons.
Got it.
And that was my entry into the legal world. I saw this guy, Jack McCoy, on television, and I didn't want to be a prosecutor at the time, mm-hmm. but I wanted to be a lawyer because I knew I enjoyed debate. I participated on a debate team at Bates, and I did speech at Georgetown, and I figured it would be something I could be good at. And so I applied, and I went to William & Mary because I wanted to be back in this area, and it was a terrific experience. And when I left William & Mary, I joined a law firm here in Washington, D.C., and it was a big law firm at the time. It's no longer around. It's called Howry & Simon. And, it was terrific.
Yeah.
A lot of challenges, which we can get into later about sort of, not having many people there who look like me, a lot of challenges trying to fit in without mentors and the value of organizations like this one in helping me get through that. But I think I would have stayed there. I would have stayed at Howry and pursued a career as a litigator. I did antitrust litigation for Anheuser-Busch mostly. That's the team I was on,
yep.
which was pretty cool, right?
Yep.
The perks
for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, a lot of perks. And then September 11th happened.
Yep.
And I was here driving in from Alexandria to DC over the 14th Street Bridge. And I think all of us who were here that Tuesday morning remember it vividly. Just the weather, the feel, just every sort of sense of that morning. It was really a perfect day, except this news was breaking. And what I did was I went to the attorney lounge at our law firm at 12th and E, and I watched the events unfold on television. Mm-hmm. And I felt the same grief that all my colleagues were feeling in that moment. I felt the same patriotism that everyone was feeling in that moment. But then I didn't get to stay in that sense of patriotism and that sense of grief. I had to get into a defensive posture. What I mean by that is that people who look like me, people who look different, began to be targeted in the backlash in the weeks that followed. I remember getting to the office and people yelling, "Look, I found him. I found bin Laden. I got him." And so I would look for different exits to avoid, one of these guys I became friends with, Jimmy, who's a homeless person, but I was just getting yelled at, and the glares and the suspicion. So that prompted me to think about what I could do to change that.
Yep.
I'm somebody who was born here. Ideal American childhood, soccer mom, played baseball, did everything, checked all the boxes. And why was I made to feel un-American and not allowed to feel the same tragedy and grief and patriotism that everybody else was in that moment? And I felt that there was a need for more understanding and a need for acceptance, because tolerance wasn't good enough for me. And so I thought about how I could do that. And for me, being a litigator, it was about becoming a federal prosecutor, to go into courtrooms, to stand up in front of juries saying that I represented the United States, that you could look and believe different, but still be part and parcel of this great thing that we call America, that you could change the perceptions of federal agents who may have a certain view of people who look different, and maybe break down stereotypes, and maybe in the process also encourage others who look like me to let them know that careers like this are possible for them too. So that was what brought me into public service. And that public service led me from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn to the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. And I was sitting there one day just doing my job, and I got a call out of the blue from then Governor Christie's office saying, "Hey, are you interested in talking to us about the Bergen County prosecutor position, which is our equivalent of a district attorney?" I had to get on Google and see what the Bergen County prosecutor did and what the office was about. And when I read that it was a chief law enforcement officer for a county of 1 million people, I jumped at it. I said, this would be doing the same thing, promoting that understanding I wanted to promote, showing people that you could look different, believe different, and love different, and just be from different walks of life and do these jobs and be part of this thing. I remember going into Governor Christie's office at the State House, and it's an intimidating meeting. He's as intimidating as he is on TV in person, maybe more so. And I just sat down and blurted out, "I'm a Democrat."
Right.
It was almost like a confession. And then I said, "I'm a Cowboys fan, though." So that led to that opportunity. And, I was in that opportunity. It's probably a longer answer than you want, but you asked me for the origin story.
This is actually okay because I'm also a Cowboys fan, but we actually don't say that here
in DC,
in this office. So.
Yeah, a lot of Commanders fans.
Yeah.
But I was doing that job, and it was fantastic. I would never give up an opportunity to go speak at a high school or an elementary school and just visit with kids, because to me, to go into that high school auditorium, to go in there with a whole bunch of detectives and talk about the dangers of the opioid epidemic, that was important. But it was also equally important because there might be a kid in the back of that classroom who looked like me when I was growing up, who felt maybe not so comfortable in their identity. And maybe it helped them feel a little bit more comfortable. Maybe it gave them a little bit more confidence to sit up straight in their
to
chairs.
show that it can happen.
It could happen, and they don't have to hide their identity or feel intimidated by anybody. And maybe it showed other children that they shouldn't be targeting or bullying somebody for what they look like. That if they saw the chief law enforcement officer for the county look like me, my kids probably didn't like me coming to their schools as much as I'd like to go to their schools.
I'm sure they love it.
They liked the drones, and they liked the little toys that we were able to bring with us. They're young still. And so, again, I was just doing that work. I focused on a couple of things. I focused on reducing violent crime. Gun violence was a big thing, even in Bergen County. The opioid epidemic, and working on police-community relations, because even at that time, and this is 2016 going into 18 is when I was in the county, we saw how frayed those relationships were and how much mistrust existed between law enforcement and the communities we serve. We saw protests in other parts of the country after Ferguson and other violent police encounters. As someone who was charged with reviewing all of those, I wanted to develop that relationship of trust in the community. So those were the issues that were important to me. And I got on the radar of Governor-elect Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great story too. I'll share it because we're going in the origin story. I was on vacation with my family at Disney World during a week we called Jersey Week at Disney. If anyone's from Jersey, this is the teachers' convention. You know this. And all of Jersey also just heads down to Disney. And so I'm at Disney and I'm at the Little Mermaid, not the ride because I couldn't get that on the Fast Pass, but the picture with Ariel the Mermaid for my then 4-year-old. And we're online and I get a call out of the blue saying, hey, we're calling from Governor-elect Murphy's office. Prosecutor, are you interested in talking to us about the Attorney General position? I said, of the United States? Like that's the only thing that I could think of. And they said, no.
Not yet.
No,
Not yet.
they said Jeff Sessions has that. No, we're talking about Jersey. And I said, absolutely. And they said, well, can you come down to Newark tomorrow? I said, can't do that. I'm at Universal and I've got the Magic Kingdom tomorrow.
Yep.
And,
Priorities.
Yeah, well, so long story short, I went down to the hotel business center, found a resume on my Gmail, sent it in, came back, interviewed, and was offered that opportunity and did that job for 3.5 years, pushing the same priorities that I talked about earlier as a county prosecutor. It's an incredibly powerful office. If you know the New Jersey AG's office, it's one of the biggest in the country with about 8,000 people. You have complete criminal authority, complete civil authority, and we did a lot of good. We did a lot of good on issues that I cared about, promoting trust between marginalized communities and law enforcement, promoting trust with immigrant communities at a time when it was difficult for immigrant communities to live outside the shadows, to promote issues of police community relations, improve them, promote really, I think, transformative law enforcement policies, only state to revamp their use of force policy completely during a very difficult period in American history, and hopefully left the place better than I found it, and outcomes with police citizen interactions were hopefully better because of those policies. And as I was thinking of what was next, sort of my career path, got a call out of the blue.
But where were you?
It was May 20th. It was
Okay.
on my anniversary.
Okay.
I was at anniversary dinner
It
with
seems
my
like
wife.
important people always want to interrupt you.
Yeah, it's funny. I got the call from the governor offering me the job on my wife's birthday, December 4th of 17. I got this call on our anniversary saying, hey, there were some issues obviously with the enforcement director before me, and they were looking and got a call out of the blue. One of the authorities I had in New Jersey or departments I had was the Division of Consumer Affairs, which had the Bureau of Securities. And so through that, I worked with some of the commissioners at the SEC. I developed contacts.
You also had the U.S. Attorney's Office before?
Yes,
right?
yeah, I had that. But I had developed a contact with a number of the commissioners and their counsel who were then working in the chair's office. So it's such a small world.
Right.
And 3.5 years in New Jersey politics will disabuse you of doing 3.5 more years, that notion. So I said, this is a great opportunity.
Well, but can I ask you about that? Because, I have an immigrant background with my family, and of all the things I have done, I think my father, who's passed away, I think the proudest was the fact that as a family immigrant, that his son ended up becoming a government public servant. And I know from, preparing for this that, as a Sikh American, but also within the Sikh religion, there's a very strong public service ethos.
Yep.
And in a way, I wanted to talk about that, both as coming from an immigrant family, as Asian American, as South Asian, but also as Sikh, because it's not every country where you get to, within the same generation or two, become a public official. And can you talk a little bit about your view of public service and how that affects you from that perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, service is core to Sikhism, and it's part of my DNA. It's sort of how you're raised. It's what the ideals are, what's talked about. You know, just because my parents weren't public servants doesn't mean that they weren't serving their community and other communities. So it's just something that you grow up with, and it's core to you. So I don't ever think I've thought about it in these terms, but it does make sense. I mean, I think it's rare where, you know, your career aligns with your personal values, your spiritual values, your community values, and so I think it's been particularly rewarding in that sense. I thought where you were going with that question was whether or not my parents are proud of me.
I'm sure
and if you
they
come
are
in
proud,
an Asian
you know.
hat, well, they don't say it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know about your experience, and I don't know about the other experiences of other Asian Americans in this room. My parents will tell my 3 daughters that they love them. Like, it just never happens with us. Like, it's just not spoken about. I'm like, you know, don't you feel the same way? They're like, yeah, but we don't need to talk about it, right? So I do think there's probably a deep sense of pride, for sure. I think they understand why I do this, and I think they appreciate it both, you know, for the reasons that I got into it and for how it allows me to live my values on a daily basis.
And you're not just, of course, a public servant. You're not just any public servant. You are the head of enforcement of the SEC. You are the Attorney General of this great state of New Jersey.
Yep.
And many things. You are and continue to be a leader. And I want to talk a little bit about leadership because, you know, particularly this month with AAPI Heritage Month, one of the stereotypes that our community kept confronting is, you know where I'm going, right?
Yep.
Yes, they're smart, they are hardworking, they're model minority,
Yep.
and they are a great psychic. But you know, including some universities have said they don't have that initiative or the personality to be a leader. Can you talk about that, but also talk a bit about how, you know, the diverse background actually may contribute to the ability to be a leader?
Yeah, I mean, so I sort of brushed back at the model minority myth and putting people into boxes, and I think, you know, it's opportunity, and I think when you start to see more and more people who look like you in positions of authority, you think that it's okay for me to also pursue that.
Yep.
So I think that's a big part of it, that there haven't been a lot of role models. There are more now, and so for me, you know, seeing a Preet Bharara do what he did. You know, we were both
Yep.
Line AUSAs when I was in Jersey. I'm sorry, I was in EDNY and he was in SDNY. But as he moved up, that made you think it's okay for me to pursue this. That you know, when I did get that first call to go interview with Governor Christie, as intimidating as it was, well, you know, others have done these leadership positions. I could do it too. So I think, you know, there's a value to that. I think the diversity piece of it, the way it's sort of contributed to my work and my leadership, I think it's given me a sense of urgency to do as much as I can in these roles. For example, you know, having experienced hate and bigotry and bias firsthand, I wanted to use the platform I had as a county prosecutor to go into schools, as I talked about, to sort of just through being present show people, you know, the need to have understanding and acceptance of people who look different and believe different. When I was AG, we were dealing with an uptick in anti-Asian hate again. Yep. And so having experienced that, it gave me an empathy and an understanding of what communities were going through. Because I remember when I was a kid in Jersey, we had the Dot Busters, a gang that was terrorizing parts of Jersey City, and there was several individuals who were attacked and one who was killed. And so whole communities felt intimidated to go to their temples, to go to their gurdwaras, to go to their houses of worship, to just live. And I knew what that felt like, and I didn't want that to happen again in New Jersey, so I used my platform to do something about it. I went into those communities. I set up a bias crimes task force. I changed the guidelines for how we investigated bias crimes to make them more victim-centered. I made sure that we tracked data and published it so people couldn't not talk about it because we put it out there, that this is a real issue. The anti-Semitism that was on the uptick, the anti-Asian hate, and then I used my platform to call out those leaders in this country that were creating an environment that was allowing this to happen. that we need to use our platforms as actively as we can to tell people that hateful rhetoric leads to hateful conduct.
And that's something as a community, frankly, we need to do more, which is
Yeah.
actually speaking up and not just be quiet.
And let
be-
people
be
know when you're
silent.
victimized. And making it easier for people to report
Right.
was part of that.
You know, someone, be it, you know, in the audience or in the future, might say, well, that's great, but Gurbir, you had like this magical career, and it's been on the rise. Has it really been without challenges, particularly based on your background, or has it really been smooth sailing? Any challenges?
So many challenges. That's why, you know, I have joked about it that it wasn't linear. You know, when I have the opportunity to speak to law students or any students who are trying to chart their career paths, my answer to them or my advice to them is, you know, don't put that much pressure on yourselves. These things
Yeah.
are never linear. Your career is never going to go the way you expect it. One door is going to close. You have to be resilient and open another. I wanted to be an English major. I wanted to write a book. Wasn't really good at that. That door closed. I went to the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. Wanted to be a diplomat. That door closed because they weren't offering the exam. I decided to go to law school and was working at a big firm. And then an external event is
Right.
what pushed me into public service. And that was however many years into my career I was at that time. So, you know, you have to be resilient. It's not linear. And it's not always been easy, right? When we talk about the law firm, you know, you all are in positions of authority in law firms, and law firms are different. We talk about DIE issues. We have mentorship. We have programs where we're trying to foster an inclusive environment. It's not always been that way. I remember coming out of law school, joining that firm, getting my first assignment, you know, the partner I was assigned to, and getting shipped off to Largo, Maryland, to sit in a warehouse and review documents. And you know, there were a couple of other people there with me, but I remember when it was an antitrust case. It was a merger, and it's a second request. And as we're going through these documents, you know, you're finding the hot documents, you're coding them or tagging them. This is like when you used to put the sheet of paper on it and you would check. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so you're going through it, and then you know you're understanding the case. You have ideas. You're presenting them up the chain, and then there would be these client meetings and presentations and bigger things, and I would never get invited to. And you know, to me, it wasn't because I screwed up the work. I wasn't there long enough to develop a reputation to screw up anything. It was no other reason, I think, than the way I looked.
Yeah.
I wasn't being given an opportunity. And I was ready to leave the firm because I was so sort of disillusioned with big law after 6 or 7 months and not finding that feeling of acceptance.
Right.
And,
Well, belonging, right?
or belonging, yeah. And so I just ran into a random lawyer who you know, not a minority, and I knew him from an experience during the summer, the prior summer, and I had a great experience as a summer associate. It's all dinners and lunches, and I don't know if it's still the same way, but yeah, big budget for the summer program.
We have fantastic lunches at Baker.
Yeah, so I don't know, it was Georgia Browns and DC Coast back then, like, you know, you're just going through the gauntlet. But I ran into him, I said, hey, Brian, you know, it's not going well. I don't feel like I'm part of the team. I don't feel included. I don't feel like I've been given any opportunities. I feel like, you know, I'm being limited because of my appearance, and that, you know, this particular partner, she doesn't want me around the client. It's a Midwestern grain company at the time. And so he said, let me work on it. And 2 days later, he invited me to his office. He said, you asked for this. This is not going to be an easy environment to work in. You know, the particular partner is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Great trial lawyer, doesn't care if you're black, brown, yellow, whatever. You just need to do the work. You need to get things done the way he wants them done, and that was fine for me. Like, at least I had the opportunity. And I spent 4 years and 3 trials with him. He spoke at my swearings in as a county prosecutor and along the way, and became a mentor for me because he gave me an opportunity. And I found somebody to help me just get through that situation who just didn't care, you know, who I was or what my background was, just cared about if I had the ability to do the work.
Well, I want to unpack that a little bit, particularly about allies and support. Because, so for instance, at Baker, I'm part of the Baker Asian Lawyers Network. We have different affinity groups. Obviously this event is, co-hosted by, SABA-DC, and you have the South Asian Bar Association nationally is actually one of the most vibrant organizations around. I don't know that has always been true, that there are all these groups, and from your experience, what are your thoughts about how these communities, these affinity groups, these organizations nowadays can help?
I mean, I think they helped back then too. They weren't as organized. We didn't have the National South Asian Bar Association in the same way we have it now. But at that time, the South Asian Bar Association in DC or whether it's in New York, just a bunch of us meeting in the back of an Indian restaurant or another Asian restaurant and just sort of sharing war stories and at least finding some community away from a place where we couldn't find a lot of community. And it just sort of got us through. And then as those organizations developed and you had a national conference, you started to see the Asian American, South Asian partners, the in-house council, the people who are starting as AUSAs or in different positions. And again, it's that seeing somebody do it inspires you and makes you think that you can do it too.
Perception becomes reality.
Perception becomes reality, and it just sort of, it's great. It helps you get through those more difficult times, and you find mentors at those organizations. And it's fantastic. I interviewed on Monday the U.S. Attorney from the Southern District of Texas, Alamdar Hamdani, who was one of the founders of the National South Asian Bar Association. And we were just baby lawyers there. He was in private practice. I was at the U.S. Attorney's office, and he wanted to go to the U.S. Attorney's office, and we both saw Amol Topper, who became the U.S. Attorney in Kentucky, in the Eastern District of Kentucky. And that was something back then. And he went to work for Amol Topper, who's now, I think he's on the circuit, right? Yeah, Sixth Circuit. And just to see that progression, he was one of the first in each of those positions. That was inspiring. And now to have the opportunity to interview Alamdar on Monday in front of the SEC for our AAPI event, that was pretty cool. And so we grew up in those organizations, and they provided us, a support network, a place where you could just ask a stupid question, like, hey, are you dealing with this at your firm? Or
and have the shared experience?
Yeah, and the shared experiences. So these organizations are invaluable. Allyship is invaluable. And the work that, that you all are doing here that you've just described, I mean, that's what we need to be doing.
Now, as we can all see, you're a very likable person. But there are a lot of people who are actually very afraid of you also because you're the Director of Enforcement. And so, it is actually one of the most important positions in our financial markets. And in your current position right now, I want to pivot a little bit and have you talk about your priorities and your goals as Director of Enforcement.
Sure. I've maybe this is the way I see things, that if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So when I was a county prosecutor, I had one or two or three things that I would keep hammering every time I spoke to my team and I spoke publicly, and it's the same thing as AG. I said, my name is Gurbir Grewal, I'm the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey, here are my 4 priorities. It's a little harder to do at the SEC because so much of our work is reactive, so much is new and emerging risk areas, so you can't really prioritize in the same way. So the way I choose to prioritize is to share with our teams internally, and whenever I have the opportunity to speak, what the animating principle is for me. And the animating principle for me is restoring public trust and confidence, not just in our financial institutions, in our markets, and regulators as well, because there's a whole segment of the population that has lost confidence and trust in those 3 large institutions, the regulators, the markets, and more broadly, large financial institutions. So I think the way in which we do that is by prioritizing 3 things: robust enforcement, robust penalties, and you might not like that, and then trying to create a culture of proactive compliance. And what I mean by the first is that we have to work with a sense of urgency when we do our work. The average investigation from opening to the recommendation stage or to the closing stage is still 24 months or maybe a little bit longer. We've gotten it down. but that's just too long. If the public reads about an incident in the news today and doesn't see accountability till 2 years later, in that intervening period, that distrust grows. And so I think it's important, not just from accountability and from that trust perspective, but also to free us up to deal with new and other risks, to move our cases more quickly. So I've tried to emphasize that as a priority and the ways in which we're doing that. And again, you could attest to the fact that I do have Wells meetings, but it is by shortening the processes. It's not saying that not every case merits a Wells meeting with the director or the deputy.
And may I say you ask very good questions
Yep.
at Wells meetings?
Oh,
May I
thank
say
you.
that? Okay.
But
Yeah.
let me just finish that thread. And so we delivered on that robust enforcement. We brought more enforcement actions this past fiscal year than the prior, but it's not totally a numbers game.
Right.
But that was important for me. And that was important to empower the staff to do that work and to make sure that we trust them and we rely on their expertise. And in the cases where we think there's a programmatic issue or a novel factual issue or a real legal dispute, we'll have the meeting. And in many cases, when we do have those meetings, we look at things differently. And we walk away sometimes, and we have walked away and said, we weren't looking at this the right way. There are real issues here, real programmatic risks. We can't make the recommendation here. On the penalty side, it was important to me as a former prosecutor to make sure penalties had their effect, their general deterrent effect and specific deterrent effect. And that we used all the remedies in our toolkit to make sure that we were getting people to play within the chalk lines. And so that's why, last fiscal year we had $6.4 billion in money ordered, 4.3 of which was in the form of penalties, the balance in disgorgement, and that was a record year for the commission. We're not going to break that record every year, but it was important to recalibrate penalties so they weren't priced in as the cost of doing business. And so, that was super important to me. And then the compliance side of it is, and I hope this is being picked up by
absolutely.
the bar, that we are trying to recognize and articulate good cooperation in our orders. We're trying to, those cases where there is zero penalty, we're trying to put in, the commission is putting in its orders the behaviors that have led to those reduced or no penalties. I know a lot of people want us to put in there, like, well, how much was the discount? What would it have been otherwise if they didn't cooperate? You know how hard that is. But
Right.
we're trying to be more explicit, and the commission has been more explicit in its public documents to highlight the types of behaviors that are resulting in great cooperation credit. And that's a realization that we can't do it alone. We need the gatekeepers to do their jobs. We need the compliance folks to do their jobs if we're going to restore that public trust in our market. So that's sort of the way in which I view this work and the priority areas for me.
And I do think that, look, every time you speak, people listen. And I do think that it is actually a healthy environment if the regulated and the regulator communicate and have transparency.
Yep.
So that you don't have two ships passing. So I don't think it's at all controversial to say that good communication is, even when we disagree,
Yeah.
it's always a good thing. In terms of trends, one of the things that is interesting about your tenure is that you're dealing with obviously a lot of changes, but one of the changes is technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to, and there may be other trends that you want to observe, but obviously crypto is one thing, but now we're hearing about AI and so forth. Tell us about, from your perspective, from an enforcement perspective, what people should be looking for and what are the trends from that standpoint?
So I think, whenever there's new technology or novel technology or new developments or new offerings, there's always this sort of cry from whether it's the bar or industry or from the Hill that our existing rules are not suited for this new technology or for these new developments. And I think one thing this historical society could appreciate is that is not a new trend, right? If you go back 25 years, there was a predecessor of mine who then, as deputy director of the enforcement division with another senior officer, wrote about this and said, people are saying that, because of these incredible developments, our existing rule sets aren't applicable. And what were they talking about then? The development of what?
Internet.
The internet.
Yeah.
They said you can't possibly apply the securities laws to the internet.
Right.
And what do? We applied the securities laws to frauds that were committed using the internet. Go back 25 years before that, when we were applying, existing securities laws and books and records provisions to companies that were hiding corrupt payments to foreign officials to prosecute, foreign bribery cases. People were saying you couldn't do that, right? But we continued to use those tools in creative ways 50 years ago to hold people accountable for foreign corrupt practices. And so, when I hear that today, and this is one of the trends that we're obviously dealing with front and center, that the regulation by enforcement, you need bespoke rules. This is such a newfangled technology. But, we live in a world where by design, the securities laws are principles-based. They're flexible. The drafters of the securities laws fully appreciated that over time offerings would evolve and that you need full, fair, and truthful disclosure around these offerings, no matter what they're called. And that's why the definition of security is so broad, and that's why the Supreme Court time and again has stated that it's a broad definition, painted with a broad brush to keep up with an offering, no matter what it's called and what shape or form it comes. So we're using those same tools to keep up with new developments, and so it's interesting, because you look at these old articles, whether it's it's Cutler's article or whether it's McLucas's article, like this is just history repeating itself over and over again.
And may I say how happy I am, and I'm sure Jim too, to know that you've been not just studying the history, but using the Historical Society's archives. Because I do think that we do stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yep.
And history matters. We're going to have an opportunity after the formal session for questions from the audience, but I do want to end this, and unfortunately we do end because you are also speaking to the future, and to the extent you can, for the junior lawyers out there, and it could be a junior lawyer from a diverse background, but also just a junior lawyer in general. What are some of your closing thoughts about, from your perspective, any lessons for them?
I think. That's an interesting question. To me, I think I've had these opportunities along the way because I've been credible in my work, right? I don't think anyone will say that I wasn't a straight shooter as a line AUSA, as a county prosecutor, as an attorney general. I'm very plain with where I'm coming from, what my intentions are, what's important to me, what we're going to do. Like, there's no element of surprise or trickery or, this is not a game. And that's because our reputations matter in this job. That's why, I might have given a speech called Lawyers Behaving Badly Too, building on Kazami's speech about the practices in the defense bar that upset me. But we say the same thing and expect the same thing for people inside the building. That we need to be credible with the bar, we need to be straightforward. This is not a game of holding your cards and surprising people. Engage in reverse proffers. Put out, information that you have, and it'll allow you maybe to have a candid conversation with your client. So none of this should be about gamesmanship. And I think my advice to young lawyers is that they're a blank slate. The minute they walk in the law firm door as a brand new associate, treat everybody with respect, whether it's the person who works at the front door, the legal secretary, everybody. Because not only are you a blank slate and you're sort of developing your reputation, but this world is so small. We might think this is a big legal world, but for me it was an interaction here or interaction there that led to somebody calling me. And so invariably, somebody's going to call me about you. Or I'm going to call somebody when your application comes in the door and say, hey, Peter used to work at your firm. What do you think about Peter? Like, everyone has the legal skills. I want to know about Peter as a person. Is he somebody who I want as a colleague? So I think, that piece of advice is important, but, credibility is so important. And maybe I'll just leave it with this. And this is not from me, but this is something that resonated with me. I was a young AUSA in the Eastern District of New York during the time of the U.S. Attorney firing scandal. And morale in the department was at an all-time low. And then Deputy Attorney General Comey was visiting a lot of the big U.S. attorneys' offices. And he came to the EDNY, and I remember we were in the ceremonial courtroom, and I remember vividly the speech. And he said to us, you know, when you enter, and I think this is true of the SEC or any public service, but he was talking about federal prosecutors. He said, when you enter this profession, each of you is given an incredible gift. And you don't realize that you received this gift perhaps until the first time you walk into a cocktail party and you tell people what it is that you do, that I'm a federal prosecutor. And you'll see that people will hang on your every word. Or you might not realize it to the first time you're interviewing a victim and they trust you and they tell you what happened to them. Or you might not realize it to the first time you go into court and a judge has a close call and sides with your argument instead of the defendant's argument. That gift, and Comey calls it a reservoir of trust and credibility. That gift is a reservoir of trust and credibility that you carry with you when you walk into a room. And that's a reservoir of trust and credibility that was filled over generations by the good work of prosecutors who came before you, who did their jobs the right way, who didn't cut corners, who were straight shooters, who treated everyone with respect. And your responsibility as a recipient of this great gift is to protect it. Because the thing about reservoirs is it takes a lifetime to fill them, but an instant to drain them. So guard it and protect it and leave it for the next generation of prosecutors who come behind you more full than you found it. And I think that's how I'm trying to do my work and live my life, and that's how I would implore young lawyers to live theirs.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to end the formal session right now, but I know that the audience here have some questions, and